The first time I realized Ethan knew. I was 16, standing in our shared bathroom with a towel around my waist, staring at my reflection like it could tell me who I was supposed to be. He barged in, his football jersey still damp with sweat, and smirked in a way that made my stomach twist. "Careful, Jamie," he said, his voice low and sharp. "Someone might think you're checking yourself out for a boyfriend." That was the hook that sank into me. The moment I knew my stepbrother had seen through the walls I'd built. We weren't blood, but we'd been thrown together when our parents married 2 years earlier. And Ethan had spent every day since sizing me up like a predator circling prey. His words that day weren't just a jab, they were a warning. A promise that he held my secret like a loaded gun. We lived in Willow Creek, a small town in Oregon where the mountains loomed like silent judges and everyone knew your business before you did. I was Jamie Carter, the quiet kid who sketched in the margins of his notebooks and rode a skateboard to escape the noise of the world. Ethan, my stepbrother, was the golden boy quarterback, homecoming king, the kind of guy who could charm anyone but chose to wield his charisma like a blade. He was 18, a year older, and he knew I was gay before I'd even whispered the word to myself. Our house was a battleground of unspoken rules. Mom and my stepdad, Paul, were too busy with their new life together to notice the tension. Ethan's taunts were subtle, always cloaked in a grin or a laugh. But they cut deep. He'd drop comments about my fancy clothes or how I spent too much time with my best friend, Marcus, who was openly bi and unapologetic. "You two planning a parade or something?" Ethan would say, loud enough for Mom to hear, but soft enough to sound like a joke. I'd laugh it off, my heart pounding, because I wasn't ready for the world to know not yet. School was no better. Willow Creek High was a maze of cliques and gossip, and Ethan ruled it like a king. One day, during lunch, I was sketching in the courtyard when he sauntered over with his crew. "Yo, Jamie, you drawing your dream guy?" he called, loud enough for half the table to snicker. I froze, my pencil hovering over the page. Marcus, sitting beside me, shot Ethan a glare, but I just mumbled something and shoved my sketchbook away. Ethan's eyes gleamed with victory. He didn't need to out me outright, just needed to keep me on edge, always wondering when he'd pull the trigger. That spring, everything changed. I met Leo at the town's only record store, a cramped shop called Vinyl Haven where I'd escaped to flip through old albums. He was new in town, a transfer student with curly black hair, a lip ring, and a smile that felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. He was browsing the punk section when I bumped into him, nearly dropping my stack of records. "Nice taste," he said, nodding at my copy of Nevermind. His voice was warm, like he didn't care about the rules of Willow Creek's social hierarchy. We started talking about music, art, the way small towns could feel like cages. Leo was openly gay, unafraid in a way that both terrified and inspired me. He didn't flaunt it, but he didn't hide it either. And when he laughed at my dumb jokes, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't just hiding. I was seen. But Ethan noticed. Of course he did. One evening, I was in the garage, tuning my skateboard, when he leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Heard you've got a new friend," he said, his tone dripping with mock curiosity. "That Leo kid. Seems real. Friendly." My hands shook as I tightened a bolt, but I didn't look up. "Just a friend," I muttered. Ethan laughed. A low, cruel sound. "Keep telling yourself that, Jamie. But I see you." He didn't stop there. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's taunts grew sharper. He'd accidentally mention Leo in front of Mom and Paul, dropping hints about how we were always together. He'd leave notes in my backpack scribbled words like "careful" or "everyone's watching." It was a game to him, a way to keep me small, scared, and silent. But the more he pushed, the more I found myself drawn to Leo, to his fearlessness, to the way he made me feel like I could be more than a secret. One night, after a particularly brutal day of Ethan's jabs, I met Leo at the riverbank behind the school. The water glittered under the moonlight, and we sat on a fallen log, sharing a bag of sour candy. "Why do you let him get to you?" Leo asked, his voice soft but firm. I stared at the river, my throat tight. Because he could ruin everything. I said, my mom, my friends, this town theory not ready for me to be. Me. Leo reached for my hand, his fingers warm against mine. You don't have to be ready for them, he said. You just have to be ready for yourself. That moment, with Leo's hand in mine, was the first time I felt like I could breathe. But it was also the moment I knew Ethan's game was about to get dangerous. Because secrets, once they're seen, can't stay hidden forever. The air in Willow Creek grew heavier as spring bled into summer. The kind of heat that made everything feel like it was on the verge of breaking. Ethan's taunts didn't let up, but they evolved, becoming less about sly comments and more about calculated moves. He'd linger outside my room when I was on the phone with Leo, his shadow looming under the door like a threat. Once, he borrowed my phone and left it open on a text thread with Leo, knowing Mom might see it. I started triple-checking my locks, my privacy, my life. Leo, though, was my anchor. We'd meet at Vinyl Haven or the riverbank, stealing moments where I could forget Ethan's shadow. One afternoon, Leo showed me a song he'd written, scrawled in a notebook with doodles of stars and guitars. It's about breaking free, he said, his eyes bright with something I wanted to believe in. I told him about my sketches, how I drew cityscapes to imagine a world beyond Willow Creek. He leaned close, his shoulder brushing mine, and said, you're going to get out of here, Jamie, and you're going to be bigger than this town. But Ethan was always watching. One day, I found a crumpled note in my locker. Leo's not your type. Stick to your lane. The words were in Ethan's jagged handwriting, and they sent a chill through me. I confronted him that night in the kitchen, my voice low so Mom wouldn't hear. What's your problem, Ethan? I hissed. He was eating cereal, casual as ever, but his eyes were cold. No problem, he said, smirking. Just looking out for you. Wouldn't want you to get confused. I wanted to scream, to shove him, to do anything but stand there with my fists clenched. But I couldn't. Ethan had power not just over me, but over the story of our family. If he outed me before I was ready, it wouldn't just be my life that unraveled. Mom was happy with Paul, happier than I'd seen her since Dad left when I was 9. I couldn't risk that. Not yet. School became a tighter rope to walk. Ethan's football buddies started giving me looks, whispering as I passed in the halls. Marcus noticed too, pulling me aside one day after art class. What's Ethan's deal? He asked, his voice sharp with worry. He's acting like he's got something on you. I shrugged, my stomach churning. Marcus was the only one who knew I was gay, but even he didn't know the full extent of Ethan's games. He's just being Ethan, I said, forcing a smile. Marcus didn't buy it, but he let it go. Then came the night of the spring talent show. Leo had convinced me to submit one of my sketches for the art display, a vibrant cityscape with hidden figures in the Shadowsa metaphor for how I felt in Willow Creek. I was nervous, but Leo's encouragement made me feel like I could take a step toward being seen. The auditorium was packed, the air buzzing with excitement. I stood at the back, watching as Leo performed his song, his voice raw and powerful. The crowd cheered, and for a moment, I let myself believe things could be okay. Then Ethan took the stage. He wasn't scheduled to perform, but he'd sweet-talked his way into a last-minute slot, claiming he wanted to share a story. My heart sank as he started talking, his voice smooth and commanding. This is about family, he said, his eyes scanning the crowd until they locked on me. About knowing someone better than they know themselves. The room went quiet, and I felt every pair of eyes turn toward me. He didn't say the word, didn't out me outright, but every word was a knife, hinting at secrets I wasn't ready to share. I bolted before he finished, my sketch forgotten in the display. Leo found me outside, sitting on the curb, my hands shaking. What the hell was that? He asked, sitting beside me. I couldn't speak, couldn't explain the weight of Ethan's words. Leo didn't push. He just sat there, his presence steady. And for the first time, I wondered if I could fight back not with fists, but with something stronger. The weeks after the talent show were a blur of paranoia. Ethan's speech had planted seeds of doubt in the school, and I felt the whispers like static in the air. Kids I barely knew started asking questions vague, probing ones about my new friend Leo. I kept my head down, my sketchbook tucked away, but Ethan's shadow was everywhere. He'd linger near my locker, drop cryptic comments in front of his friends. And once, he left a rainbow sticker on my backpack, peeled off just enough to look accidental. Leo was my refuge, but even that felt fragile. We'd meet at the riverbank or sneak into the record store after hours, thanks to the owner, Ms. Clara, who let us hang out in the back. One night, Leo showed me a playlist he'd made from punk anthems mixed with soft indie tracks. "This is you," he said, pointing to a song called Rebel Hearts. I laughed, but my chest ached with something I couldn't name. I wanted to tell him everything about Ethan, about the fear that kept me up at night, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I kissed him. It was impulsive, under the dim glow of a streetlight outside Vinyl Haven, with the hum of crickets in the background. His lips were soft, surprised, but he kissed me back, and for a moment, the world was just us. When we pulled apart, he grinned, his lip ring glinting. "Took you long enough," he said. I laughed, but the joy was fleeting. Ethan's voice echoed in my head, "Everyone's watching." The next day, Ethan upped the ante. I came home to find my sketchbook on the kitchen table, open to a page I'd drawn of Leo's profile. His smile, the way his hair fell over his eyes. Ethan was leaning against the counter, sipping a soda. "Nice art," he said, his tone casual but venomous. "You should show it to Mom. Bet she'd love to know what inspires you." My heart stopped. I snatched the sketchbook, my hands trembling. "Stay out of my stuff," I snapped. He just laughed, walking away like he'd already won. I started hiding everything, me sketches, my texts, my thoughts. But Ethan was relentless. He'd accidentally bump into me in the halls, loud enough to draw attention, or mention Leo's name in front of Mom and Paul during dinner. "Jamie's been spending a lot of time with that new kid," he'd say, his smile all innocence. Mom would nod, oblivious, but Paul's eyes would linger on me, questioning. Marcus, ever loyal, tried to help. He'd distract Ethan's friends in the halls or pull me into group hangouts to keep me visible but safe. One day, he dragged me to a local diner, insisting we needed a break. "You can't let him control you," Marcus said, stirring his milkshake. "He's just a bully with a crown." I wanted to believe him, but Ethan wasn't just a bully who was family, and that made it worse. Then came the night that broke me. Leo and I were at the riverbank, lying on a blanket, staring at the stars. He was telling me about his old town, how he'd come out to his parents and survived the fallout. "It's not about them accepting you," he said. "It's about you accepting you." I was about to respond when headlights cut through the darkness. Ethan's truck pulled up, his music blaring. He stepped out, his silhouette tall and menacing. "Well, isn't this cozy?" he called, his voice dripping with mockery. Leo stood, ready to confront him, but I grabbed his arm. "Don't," I whispered. Ethan's eyes met mine, and I saw the truth. He wasn't just playing a game anymore. He was ready to burn everything down. After Ethan's ambush at the riverbank, I stopped sleeping. Every creak in the house felt like him lurking, waiting to strike. I kept my phone under my pillow, my sketchbook locked in a box under my bed. Leo tried to keep things light, texting me song lyrics or sneaking me notes in class. But the weight of Ethan's threat hung over me like a storm cloud. School became a battlefield. Ethan's friends started spreading rumors. Nothing explicit, but enough to make people stare. "Heard Jamie's got a crush," one of them said in the locker room, loud enough for me to hear. I kept my eyes on the floor, my heart racing. Marcus overheard and went off, yelling at them until a coach intervened. But the damage was done. The whispers were growing, and Ethan was fanning the flames. I tried talking to Mom, testing the waters. One night, while she was washing dishes, I lingered in the kitchen. "Mom, What if? What if I was different? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She turned, her hands dripping with soap, and smiled. You're perfect the way you are, Jamie, she said. But her eyes were tired, and I knew she didn't understand what I was asking. I couldn't push further, not with Ethan in the house. Listening. Leo, though, refused to let me shrink. He dragged me to a local punk show at a dive bar outside town, a place where no one from Willow Creek would see us. The music was loud, the crowd electric, and for a few hours, I felt free. We danced, our hands brushing, and I let myself imagine a world where I didn't have to hide. Afterward, we sat in his beat-up car, the windows fogged from our breath. You're stronger than you think, Leo said, his voice steady. Ethan's only got power if you give it to him. But Ethan's power was real. The next day, I found a photo taped to my locker, a blurry shot of me and Leo at the riverbank, our hands almost touching. No note, no name, but I knew who'd left it. I tore it down, my hands shaking, but the image burned into my mind. Ethan wasn't just threatening me anymore, was building a case. I confronted him that night in the garage, where he was working on his truck. What do you want from me? I demanded, my voice cracking. He wiped his hands on a rag, his expression unreadable. I want you to be honest, he said, his tone almost sincere. Stop hiding, Jamie. It's pathetic. For a second, I thought he might understand, might care. But then he smirked. Or maybe I'll just tell everyone for you. I walked away, my chest tight, and called Leo. We met at Vinyl Haven, where Ms. Clara let us sit in the back room. I told him everything, Ethan's notes, the photo, the constant fear. Leo listened, his jaw tight. He's scared of you, he said finally. Scared of what you could be if you stopped letting him win. I wanted to believe him, but all I could see was Ethan's smirk, his finger on the trigger. The breaking point came at a family barbecue. Ethan invited his football buddies, and the backyard was loud with laughter and music. I stayed on the edges, sketching in my notebook, until Ethan called me over. Jamie's got some art to show, he said, grabbing my sketchbook before I could stop him. He flipped it open to a page of Leo, holding it up for everyone to see. The crowd went quiet, and I felt the world tilt. Pretty good, right? Ethan said, his voice mocking. Who's this guy? Jamie. I froze, my heart in my throat. Mom looked confused. Paul's eyes narrowed, and Ethan's friend snickered. Leo wasn't there to save me, and Marcus was across town. It was just me, standing in the spotlight Ethan had built, and I had to decide, run or fight. I didn't run. Something snapped in me that day at the barbecue, a spark of defiance I didn't know I had. I grabbed my sketchbook from Ethan's hands, my face burning. It's just a drawing, I said, my voice louder than I expected. What's your problem? The words hung in the air, and for the first time, Ethan looked surprised. His friend stopped laughing, and Mom stepped forward, her brow furrowed. What's going on, boys? She asked. Ethan recovered quickly, flashing his golden boy smile. Just messing around, Mom, he said, but his eyes were on me, daring me to push back. I didn't. Not yet. But that moment planted a seed. I wasn't going to let him control me forever. Leo was waiting for me at the riverbank that night, his face lit with concern. I told him what happened, my voice shaking with anger and fear. You stood up to him, Leo said, his hand on my shoulder. That's a start. I shook my head. It's not enough. He's not going to stop. Leo's eyes softened, but his voice was firm. Then you make him stop. Not by fighting his way, but by being you. The next few weeks were a tightrope. Ethan backed off slightly, maybe sensing he'd pushed too far, but his presence was still a shadow. I started opening up to Marcus, telling him about the notes, the photo, the constant dread. He was furious, ready to confront Ethan himself. But I stopped him. This is my fight, I said, surprising myself. Marcus nodded, his expression fierce. Then fight smart, Jamie. I started small. I stopped hiding my sketchbook, leaving it out during art class where Ethan's friends could see. I drew bolder cityscapes with figures holding hands. No faces, but the message was clear. I wore a rainbow pin on my backpack, a gift from Leo, small enough to be subtle, but big enough to feel like a declaration. Ethan noticed, his jaw tightening, but he didn't say anything. Not yet. At home, I tested the waters with Mom again. One night, while we were watching TV, I asked, what if I liked someone different? She looked at me, her eyes searching. Like who? She asked softly. I hesitated, my heart pounding. Just someone not everyone would expect. She reached for my hand. I just want you to be happy, Jamie. It wasn't everything I needed, but it was a start. Leo and I grew closer, stealing moments at the record store or the riverbank. One night, he gave me a bracelet leather with a small silver charm. For courage, he said. I wore it every day, a reminder that I wasn't alone. But Ethan was still there, waiting for his moment. And it came at the worst possible time. The school was hosting a pride event, a small one organized by Marcus and the art club. Leo convinced me to submit a paisea painting of two hands reaching for each other against a city skyline. I was terrified, but I did it. The night of the event, the gym was decorated with rainbow flags, and Marcus was emceeing, his energy infectious. I stood by my painting, my heart in my throat, as people milled around. Leo was there, his hand brushing mine, and for a moment, I felt invincible. Then Ethan walked in. He wasn't supposed to be there. Football practice was scheduled, but he'd come anyway, his friends trailing behind. He stopped at my painting, his eyes narrowing. This yours, Jamie? He called, loud enough for the room to hear. The crowd turned, and I felt the air leave my lungs. Looks personal, he said, his voice laced with venom. Got something you want to share? The room was silent, every eye on me. Leo stepped forward, ready to intervene, but I shook my head. This was a moment I'd been running from. I took a breath, my voice trembling but clear. Yeah, I said. It's mine. And it's me. The words hung in the air, raw and real. And for the first time, I didn't care what Ethan thought. I was done hiding. The gym felt like it was holding its breath after I spoke. Ethan's smirk faltered, just for a second, but it was enough to know I'd shaken him. Leo's hand found mine, a quiet anchor, and Marcus stepped up, his voice booming. Let's give it up for Jamie's art, he shouted, pulling the crowd's attention back to the event. People clapped, some hesitantly, but it was enough to break the tension. Ethan turned and left, his friends following, and I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. But the fight wasn't over. At home, Ethan was colder, his taunts replaced by silence that felt even worse. He'd lost his audience at the pride event, but he wasn't done. I caught him watching me, his eyes calculating, like he was planning his next move. I didn't know what it would be, but I knew it was coming. School was different now. Some kids avoided me. Others whispered. But a few, like Sarah, a girl from art class, came up to say they loved my painting. Marcus was a rock, always there with a joke or a fierce defense if anyone got too bold. Leo, though, was my strength. We started holding hands in the halls, small acts of defiance that felt like victories. Each one chipped away at the fear Ethan had built in me. Mom noticed the change. One night, she pulled me aside after dinner. You seem lighter, she said, her eyes searching mine. I took a deep breath. The bracelet Leo gave me warm against my wrist. Mom, I'm gay, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. Her face froze, then softened. She hugged me, her voice thick. I love you, Jamie. Always. It wasn't perfect. Paul was quieter, his discomfort clear, but it was a start. Ethan, though, was a storm waiting to break. The night of the homecoming game, he finally struck. I was in the bleachers with Leo, cheering for Marcus, who'd joined the dance team for a halftime performance. Ethan was on the field, the star quarterback, but his eyes kept finding me in the crowd. After the game, he cornered me in the parking lot, his face a mask of rage. "You think you're brave now?" he spat. "You think you can just flaunt it and everyone's gonna clap?" I stood my ground, my heart pounding. "I'm not hiding anymore. Ethan, you don't get to control me." His fists clenched, and for a second, I thought he might hit me. But Leo stepped between us, his voice steady. "Back off, Ethan. This isn't your story." Ethan glared, but something in Leo's eyes, fearless, unwavering, made him hesitate. He stormed off, his truck peeling out of the lot. The next day, I found a letter in my locker. It wasn't Ethan's usual taunts. It was longer, written in his jagged scrawl, and it wasn't what I expected. "I don't get you, Jamie. I don't get why you'd choose this. But I'm not your enemy. I just wanted you to be strong." I stared at the words, my mind reeling. Was this an apology? A justification? I didn't know, but it felt like a crack in Ethan's armor. I showed the letter to Leo, who read it with a frown. "He's scared," he said. "Not of you being gay, but of you being stronger than him." I wasn't sure I believed that, but it made me think. Ethan had always been the golden boy, the one everyone looked to. Maybe my truth was a mirror he didn't want to face. I decided to talk to him. One last time. I found him in the garage, working on his truck. "Why?" I asked, holding up the letter. He didn't look at me, just kept tightening a bolt. "I thought I was helping," he said finally, his voice low. "Pushing you to be tough. This town, it's not kind to people like you." I stared at him, seeing not the bully, but a kid who didn't know how to deal with his own fears. "I don't need you to make me tough," I said. "I need you to let me be me." Ethan didn't respond that night in the garage, but something shifted. He stopped leaving notes, stopped dropping hints at dinner. The taunts didn't vanish completely, but they were quieter, less vicious. I didn't trust it. Not fully, but I felt the weight on my chest lighten. Just a little. School was still a maze of whispers, but I had Leo, Marcus, and a few others who'd started to see me, not just the rumors. My art became bolder paintings of cityscapes with figures in the open, no longer in shadows. At the spring art show, I won a small award, and when my name was called, Leo cheered louder than anyone. Mom was there too, clapping with tears in her eyes. Paul stood beside her, his smile tentative but there. Ethan didn't come to the show, but he was waiting when I got home, leaning against the porch railing. "Heard you won," he said, his voice neutral. I nodded, waiting for the jab. It didn't come. Instead, he handed me a sketchbook, not mine, but a new one, blank and crisp. "Figured you'd need more space," he said, then walked inside before I could respond. It wasn't an apology. Not really, but it was the closest I'd get. I started to understand Ethan, or at least try to. He was a product of Willow Creek, of a world that rewarded strength and punished difference. He'd seen my truth as a weakness, something to exploit, but maybe he'd also seen it as a threat to the world he knew. I didn't forgive him not yet, but I saw the cracks in his armor, the fear behind his cruelty. Leo and I grew stronger. We planned to leave Willow Creek after graduation, maybe head to Portland or Seattle, where we could be ourselves without shadows. Marcus was coming too, dreaming of art school and a life louder than our small town. Mom started asking about Leo, not as a friend, but as someone I loved. And I answered honestly. Paul was slower to come around, but he listened, and that was enough for now. The night before graduation, I sat on the riverbank with Leo, the same place where Ethan had tried to break us. We shared a bag of sour candy, the stars bright above us. "You did it," Leo said, his hand in mine. "You faced him, and you're still here." I smiled, the bracelet he'd given me catching the moonlight. "We're still here," I corrected. Graduation day was a blur of caps and gowns, cheers and tears. Ethan was there, the golden boy in his quarterback glory, but he didn't look at me with that old smirk. When I walked across the stage, I saw him clap, just once, his face unreadable. It wasn't a victory, not fully, but it was a truce. As I packed my bags for Portland, I found Ethan's letter in my desk drawer. I read it again, then tucked it away. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a reminder. My truth was mine to tell. And I told it. Ethan had tried to use it against me, but in the end, it was my strength, not his weapon. I left Willow Creek with Leo's hand in mine, Marcus joking in the back seat, and a sketchbook full of dreams. The road ahead was open, and for the first time, I wasn't running. I was free.